buckle up, it's time to cover desktop grids as well. So this is probably the biggest topic of all, because there's a lot of different details that we need to keep in mind, just because desktop sizes are varying a lot, and also the context of use and the type of product it is can influence your grids a lot. So when it comes to desktop grids, I usually split them into two. One approach is more connected to websites, and the other approach is more connected to web applications. If you don't know the difference, there is a free introductory course where we cover a lot of those details. It's called Introduction into Product Design, and we have it for free on our website. It's just 2 hours long. And if you're just looking for this one specific detail, like, it's one video there. So I don't want to spend our time, because this is not the time and place to cover the differences between web apps and websites. Overall, when it comes to websites, they're more connected to presenting the content to the user. So they're more inspirational, usually more visual and presentational, while when it comes to web applications, they're kind of a place where a user comes in and they have to do some kind of work and complete their jobs. And it doesn't have to be like a job they're paid for. Something like Gmail is a web application that you can use in your browser, and it helps you go through your emails and send emails and so on and so on. So I see websites as something that's more presentational, and I see web apps, amongst all other things that are connected to what makes it a web app versus a website. One of the biggest differences is how much you can influence the content and how much you're actually working on it versus just consuming the content. So if we take a couple of desktop sizes, what I like to do is kind of research for example, if it's a web application I'm working and the specific audience that I'm working for, I know that they're going to have like big screens, because it's just a company of like 100 employees that are all working on the same equipment. That means that I'm really, really sure about what kind of a grid I need to use. While if the design I'm working on needs to cover a lot of different edge cases and I'm not sure if I am even aware of all of them, then I have to consider all of those constraints when I'm planning my grid as well. So what I like to do is I kind of explore different and most popular desktop sizes, and I try to cover the smallest one of them, ensuring that whoever opens this is gonna have at least a great experience, if not the best one. So when it comes to desktop, I will always work in this size, and I'll try to make my grid fit into the smallest size of desktop there is. So it would be a width of this. So even with this inside, as like a general guideline, I would still create more margins on the left and right side to ensure that someone on the smallest size is not gonna have content just starting from the left edge of the screen and going to the right edge of the screen if it's like text going from left to right. So what I like to do is create a grid, and I'm again more talking about the perspective of websites at the moment. I can play around with stretch or center depending on the need of it. More times than not, I'm actually gonna kind of have a couple of breakpoints, and the content is going to be contained and the margins are going to be stretching, versus having my content stretching, because there's a lot of different parameters that I would then have to think about. Unless it's like a very visual page, I'm more often than not gonna contain the content in some sense. So in that case, I would use center. With websites, I do like to go bigger with gutters, because it's allowing me to have a lot more space with some layouts that often happen on websites. So if you've ever seen a website, it's pretty common for like a couple of cards to be next to each other like this. And if instead of cards, it's just like text at 4 different sections, I don't want text to have something like 16 pixels, one paragraph from another paragraph. So I do like to make it at least a little bit bigger. So I'm playing around with numbers like 32 or 44. Again, a lot of those numbers are divisible by 8 because I do like to make all of my designs divisible by it. And after that, I would have to figure out what the column sizes are. So you can play around with something like this, just kind of making it fit in with the grid that you've created. Maybe we can make this gutters even smaller and make this a little bit bigger. Yeah, so something like this is probably where I would land on if I was thinking about a website like this. So you can see it's 1120 pixels. That's perfect. It's gonna look good on basically any desktop size. I don't know if there are like any desktops that are still using the 1024 pixel width, which is something that was around like 10 years ago and maybe a most popular size like 10 to 15 years ago. So knowing that, I would have this design for like a regular desktop, and then knowing that there are some larger desktops as well, I would try to see if just like keeping bigger margins is going to be enough for me, or if I actually need to kind of make adjustments to my grid and make it a little bit different to fill in more space on some of the larger screens. It really depends on the content, so I would really have to test it out and see what to do. But knowing that I covered most of the desktop ground just by having this set up like this is going to be really useful in the beginning. When it comes to web applications, I'm going to have most definitely a contained grid, because it allows me to work a lot better with how some content is going to be stretched, because with web applications, you're most likely going to have some tables or some input fields and elements like that are, if you make them stretch, depending on the grid, can get really chaotic. Like I've seen developers test out interfaces like that on their large screens, and it's just like your eye has to go from here to really like see everything, instead of you being able to focus on the task at hand and kind of go over it. So in here, I do personally prefer, again, contained grids, but it doesn't have to be necessarily true for any type of project that I'm going to work on. So again, you're kind of limiting yourself in a way, but you're doing that to achieve some benefits. If that's true, perfect. If not, play around with a different approach. So you can always use stretch and then just set up some margins and ensure that your content is going to work with those as well. When it comes to gutters, I am going to make them smaller. So like anything from 16 to 32 is still fine from my perspective when you're working on web applications. Most often I'm going to use something like 24. It gives me enough of a wiggle room to have multiple cards and elements that are often found in interfaces like that. So you can play around with whatever works best for you. But when it comes to desktop and web applications, I do want to ensure that we cover one more thing that's really important. And that's the fact that you're not trying to kind of squeeze in sidebars by doing some random things like this. To really create a solid desktop web app grid that has a sidebar on the left side, I use multiple frames to do so. So the main frame is kind of the parent element that just shows me how everything works and looks together. But when it comes to the sidebar, I make it its own frame, and often it's going to be somewhere in between like 200 plus to 300 pixels, so something like 248 or 264 or something like that. That's going to work well for your sidebar. Figure out how many elements you're going to have there and how wide they need to be. If you want to, not auto layout. If you want to, you can add a grid to it. Most likely you're just going to need one column and the margins on the left and right sidebar, something like this, and that's it. Now when it comes to the second frame, that's going to be the frame that covers all of the other parts. And I would make this sidebar left, top, and bottom, so it's stretching irrelevant to the content that I have. And in here, I would do left to right and top to bottom. And this one I can just make white for the demo purposes. And in here, I'm gonna be using all of my 12 columns again, with the margin on the left and right sidebar, like whatever it needs to be. Or you can make it just centered like this, and let's use something that we know is gonna work. Something like this is gonna be a perfect grid for a web application. It gives you enough space in here to really put the focus on the content in here, but it also takes care of the sidebar that you have. And now if we take the main frame that has both of these frames inside, you can see how flexible your grid actually is, and it's keeping everything in here very contained, and you can focus on designing in here and ensure that all of your elements and everything is working well together. So those are a couple of strategies and things that I think about when I'm designing for desktops. Another thing that you might do is, as I've said, like move more towards the stretch idea, and kind of just have padding on the left side and right side defined. Again, since those tend to be more visual pages, I would play around with some bigger numbers like this. And if it's stretching, then it's going to work like this. So like all of your elements are going to stretch as well. When you're thinking about projects like that, you need to ensure that like your typography is also going to be responsive when scaling, that your photos are going to keep like the same ratios and keep everything consistent. So it's a little bit of a different approach. I'm personally more of a product designer, so even though I am working sometimes on websites and landing pages and things like that, most of my work is actually on long-term projects, be it a mobile app or a web application, and they do kind of require a little bit of a different way of thinking. So most of my designs are going to be more mathematical and systematical, instead of like trying to ensure that 16 different screen sizes all feel very inspirational and visually as appealing as they can be for like a particular fashion brand or something. Or like e-commerce is somewhere in the middle of those, because those flows can get really complex, and informational architecture can be complex, so you need to also take care of all of those things as you're planning your grids and everything. But yeah, just keep in mind that these are a couple of approaches that you can take. Just ensure that you're using the right type of grid to work on the project that you're working on. And in here, you can see that most likely I'm going to have some kind of a title in here. Then there might be a button in here on this side of the screen. And in here, it can be like a really big card, while in here, it's going to be some kind of a sidebar card or something. And grid is going to help you position things the right way. Again, like I'm trying to quickly mock it up, but I'm getting triggered by not having the same height and width of elements as I should. So I'm just going to erase it to kind of close off this lesson. But hopefully you understand the logic and everything that you need to think about when you're planning your grids in Figma. And besides being able to kind of use different frames within the main parent frame to plan your design, you can also, if needed, add multiple of these grids to your design, and maybe that's gonna help you get to the point that you need your designs to get to. So yeah, see you in the next lesson.